Well, hello and welcome to you all. I'm Andrew Sharman. It's a pleasure to welcome you here at the start of our live and direct 2023 week of events for 1% Safer. Thank you for joining us. As you're aware, this session is being recorded so that we can make it available to you after this week of events as a replay. So now that you've subscribed to join us here today, you'll get a link next week with all of the accesses for everything that's been happening this week, or everything that will happen this week, given that this is day one of an exciting time ahead. You can interact with us during this session by using the chat box on Zoom, so feel free to drop something into the chat whenever you like. If you have some questions, you can also use the Q&A box on the Zoom menu as well. So do feel free to raise any questions or any comments as we go. It'll be great to share with you. Your microphones are disabled, and so's your video as well, I think. But do please get involved and share some thoughts. I can see Melissa Mark saying hello everyone and welcome to you there as well. Thanks, Melissa. Melissa's one of our board members at the 1% Safer Foundation. I thought as we begin this week, it might be useful just to kind of set some context around 1% Safer, tell you a little bit about what it is. I don't know whether you've got a copy of the 1% Safer book yet or not. If you haven't, please buy a copy now. Every penny from every copy sold goes directly into the 1% Safer Charitable Foundation. And then we give away all of those funds as grants and bursaries and scholarships to OSH practitioners around the world. And we're really excited about the work that we've been doing, particularly the scholarships. We over the last year, we've given away over 100 bursary scholarships in partnership with the International Institute of Risk and Safety Management in countries including Ghana, Egypt, India, and Pakistan. And we're also working with the South African Institute of Occupational Safety and Health doing something similar. So it's really fantastic to be able to support the OSH profession globally. The 1% Safer Foundation, by the way, also takes applications from individual OSH practitioners who are struggling and need a little bit of extra support. So do have a look at 1%safer.com and click on the foundation to find out more about those grants. Perhaps there's someone in your network that you might be able to suggest they have a look at the application for grants. So anyhow, without further ado, let me kind of move forward a little bit. I said that I wanted to offer you a bit of context for why we're here today and every day this week. And really, I guess I'll just kind of rewind a couple of years to when the COVID pandemic hit. And I was getting frustrated with the world of work, really, and the trends that were moving forward in safety. There seemed to be this super focus on getting to zero accidents, and this idea that all risk and all error needed to be eliminated. And I don't think that's an efficient nor an effective way to try to improve workplace safety. So I came up with this idea that if we could just make some incremental progress, some marginal gains day after day in the right direction, then that would be a great step forward. And I started thinking about the numbers, and you probably know this number, 2.78 million. It's the number of people who lose their lives every year due to workplace accidents and work-related ill health, 2.78 million. Now, that's a huge number, isn't it, to get our heads around? And I think it's so big that it almost just slips out of sight. So I started running the numbers and calculating, what does it really mean? Well, 2.78 million means 7,616 people dead from their work every day. That's still a big number, isn't it? But perhaps we might look at it and think, nearly 8,000 people. Okay, that's about the same size as the town that I'm from in Scotland. But still, it's hard to kind of get our heads around nearly 8,000 people every day. How about this one, 317? That's how many people die every hour. 317 people every hour dead through their work, through occupational injury and work-related ill health. Now, do me a favor, count with me. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 10 seconds. Every 10 seconds, someone's dead as a result of their work. Every 10 seconds. Now, this really alarms me. This number also hasn't really changed over the last few decades, and that suggests to me that the way that we're working in occupational safety and health isn't working. We've got to do something different. And that's really the whole idea behind the 1% Safer movement. As I was sitting thinking about what to do a couple of years ago about this challenge that we face globally in safety, the UB40 song, 1 in 10, was running through my head. I am the 1 in 10, a number on a list. Nobody knows me. It's like I don't exist. And I think that's one of the issues with the way that we're working on safety globally, that the numbers dominate. And it's almost like the performance statistics have taken over the importance of the people. And I think what we've got to do is put people back at the heart of health and safety. So that's the idea behind the book. Let's see if we can create something that contributes positively to the world of work. And my initial idea was to ask 100 of the world's leading thinkers in safety to write one page, one chapter, 500 words, with the best idea, the best wisdom that they could think of. Now, I thought I'd hedge my bets. So I wrote to 144 people thinking maybe I'll get 100 of those that say yes. In fact, 143 of them all said yes, this is a great idea and we want to get into it. And so what we've got is not 100 chapters, but 137 chapters. And the book is unlike any other safety book. I hope you'll agree. There's some really kind of cool graphics that provoke some thought. And each chapter, each of those 137 chapters is just one page, maximum 500 words. Now, and we got contributions from some of the world's leading thinkers, people like Marshall Goldsmith, the world's #1 executive leadership coach, Evelyn Corton from the World Health Organization, Sven Tim from the ILO, some of the biggest names in safety, people like Eric Holnagel, Sidney Decker, some of the biggest names in organizational culture. In fact, Edgar Schein sadly departed in January this year, just before his 95th birthday, regarded by many as the godfather of organizational culture, jumped in and wrote a chapter. We've got academics, policymakers, thought leaders, OSH professionals, and many, many others, including business leaders too, all wanting to contribute to making the world of work a safer place. So I'm quite excited about this book. And in fact, not just me, Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth, now no longer with us, of course, and her son, then Prince Charles, now King Charles, both wrote and offered letters of support to our foundation, thinking that this was a great idea and were encouraged to see what we were doing. The original idea was the book. Let's create a book. Let's make it filled with great thoughts. But then actually, the movement started to grow. We created a charitable organization, a board of trustees, and this is a good point for me to say thank you officially to the board of trustees who will give their time voluntarily without any kind of reward and rarely recognition either. But these guys are the ones that really make things happen. And that board is responsible for creating this week of events. This is the second time that we've created a Live and Direct Summit. And it's fantastic that we're able to do a full week of events this week for you. That's thanks to those people on the board. So we've ran our first summit in 2021, and it was a great thing. On the back of that, we started creating the 1% Safer community, a quarterly event where people just like you get together to share what they're doing to make the world of work 1% safer, sharing good ideas and discussing challenges. So look out for an email from us in the next few weeks telling you about the next community event, we'd love to talk to you about that and let you into that. It's a great place to share. And of course, there's no charge attached with it. It's just people sharing great ideas and best practices. So come and join us. So that's a bit about the book. If you haven't got a copy, I'd really encourage you to do it. It's as I say, it's unlike any other book on safety that's ever existed. It's almost a kilogram in weight. For those of you who are joining us from the United States, that's about 2.2 pounds. So it's a big, chunky coffee table book. And there's some really brilliant ideas there, 137 chapters. So do pick up a copy, please, if you don't have one yet. So what is it all about then, this 1% safer idea? What am I talking about when I say marginal gains? Well, it's pretty simple, really. If you do nothing except what you're currently doing, in a year from now, you'll kind of be in more or less the same place. The power of marginal gains is really interesting, that if we just get better by 1% each day, we have a significant change in where we are. Putting that in numerical values, doing nothing gets the same result. But a small, consistent effort, just 1% better each day times 365, gives us a 37.7 times improvement on where we currently are. Now, that's pretty cool, isn't it? But put it in percentage terms, and it's even more astounding. A 1% improvement right now, day after day after day, takes us to 3,800% improvement over the next year. Now, that's performance improvement, isn't it? Now, this idea of marginal gains, incremental progress, is not my idea, and it's certainly not new or novel. In fact, someone way smarter than me talked about this a long time ago. Albert Einstein said the most powerful force in the universe is compound interest. Compound interest, marginal gains, incremental progress, 1% safer, small steps in the right direction day after day after day. You're going to learn some of these small steps from Professor Dr. Andrew Hopkins today. He's going to talk to you about the challenges with leadership in safety and safety culture. Can't wait to share that with you in just a moment. But think about this now in context. 1% safer would mean 28,000 lives saved every year, 1% of 2.78 million, nearly 28,000 people. That's got to be a target worth striving for, isn't it? So I suppose the big question then is this: how do I get better today than yesterday? And the answer, of course, is this step-by-step marginal gain incremental progress. Daniel Kahneman, you've probably heard of him. He wrote a best-selling book called Thinking Fast and Slow. Fantastic psychologist and economist, suggests that actually in the grand scheme of things, perhaps as human beings, we focus on achieving too much. And what we've got to do is hope for what's called practically significant improvement. If we can get a few percent at a relatively low cost, that's a success, Kahneman says. And I think he's absolutely right. So 1% Safer Foundation, we're trying to help you get some practically significant improvement this week as we work towards the United Nations Day for Safety and Health on Friday this week, the 28th of April. Every day this week, we've got a whole bunch of sessions running for you. Here's the headline events. We've actually got even more than that happening this week. So look at the website, 1percentsafer.com, to get the full rundown and the timings for everything. Because you've attended this session, you've got access to everything for the entire week. So you can dip in and dip out as often as you like. Come to them all, or just choose the favorites. Remember, we're recording everything. So you'll get a link giving you access to all of the recordings. And if there's some people in your network that aren't here today, please invite them. Please get them to come and join. Remember, the ticket for the week is only £20. £20, and every cent of that goes into the charitable foundation, which then we can use to continue our good work in bursaries and grants and funding for organizations that need that little bit of support, and for individuals too. You can click on the link that's in the chat box. Melissa's just posted it for us there, 1percentsafer.com/events, and you can get the full details there. Thanks to the generous sponsorship of our gold sponsors, Cority and Quentic, we're able to offer free tickets for people who are in developing roles in the OSH profession. So if your role is health and safety officer, advisor, analyst or assistant, or health and safety manager, basically anybody who's not a health and safety director or a VP, then you can get a free ticket using the code OPSDEV. OPSDEV. And if you've already bought a ticket and you'd like to extend the invite out to your teams, then we're happy to give you a free ticket for your teams too. Just use the code OPSTEAM, OPS team. So click on that link that Melissa's posted in the chat and share it, please, in your network. We'd love to get as many people as possible coming to our sessions this week. So let's get into it then. Let's get into the session for today. It's Dr. Andrew Hopkins. I've long admired Andrew's work, and in fact, he was one of the first contributors to the book. Even though he's on the opposite side of the planet to me in Australia, Andrew wrote back immediately when I asked him to contribute a chapter, saying, yes, for sure, I'm in. And it's a brilliant chapter in the book. So if you haven't got the book, here's my final plug for it. Get a copy and read Andrew Hopkins' piece here. Today, we're going to run a video that Andrew recorded specially with me just a few days ago for this session. Of course, right now in Australia, it's the middle of the night and Andrew couldn't join us at this time. So we recorded a video together where I asked him a few questions about his chapter. He's got a lot to cover. The video is about 30 minutes and he focuses on why the challenge with safety culture is so great and how we can break through the barriers around safety culture by really driving better safety leadership, starting right at the top with the CEO. He also is going to talk to you about this idea of curious inquiry, why it's so important and why perhaps as humans we've lost the art of curiosity. Ultimately, in this next 30 minutes, he's going to tell you how to drive forward better safety performance. I had a great time talking with him. I found it really fascinating what he had to say, and I hope that you do too. At the end of the video, in 30 minutes from now, I'll be back here with you and we can have a little chat. So any questions that you have, please use the Q&A box on Zoom or any comments. If you just want to share some comments, you can do that in the Q&A box too. Seems the chat box is not letting you type stuff in. So do feel free to use the Q&A box for anything that you want to contribute. And you can use it during the video and I'll pick up at the end and share whatever comments or questions are coming through there. So without further ado, Professor Dr. Andrew Hopkins talking to you on this very first day of 1% Safer Live and Direct 23 about safety culture and leadership. Let's have a listen to what he has to say. Here we go. Okay, cool. Andrew Hopkins, Emeritus Professor Andrew Hopkins, I'm delighted to see you. Thank you very much for your contribution to 1% Safer. I wonder if you might just give us a couple of minutes of your time and tell us a bit about why you wanted to contribute a chapter to the book.
Well, hi, Andrew. Yes, thanks. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk a bit more about it. Yes, it's because I do have some views about how we can get to greater safety in the workplace. And there are all kinds of ways, but the one I'm wanting to focus on is the role of CEOs, and they really do control the levers of safety in a way that many of them don't understand and don't realize. And so a lot of my work is designed to try and get CEOs to be more responsible when it comes to decision making that impacts on safety. So in my earlier contribution to 1% Safer, I talked about this and I said the problem is that CEOs are incentivized to maximize return on investment. And if that's all they're incentivized to do, then they're not going to focus on safety. No matter what they say, they will frequently say safety is our top priority, safety is the #1 value. They'll say safety is not a priority because it's a value. There's all this terminology that gets trotted out in this kind of way. But the end result is that they don't focus on safety. So it's very difficult to develop quantitative measures which could be used to incentivize CEOs. And so that's essentially what I was getting at in my very brief commentary. What I want to do now is talk about qualitative ways in which we can incentivize CEOs, things that don't depend upon numbers, because as we know, numbers can be played and gamed in all kinds of ways. So I want to focus on some qualitative ways in which we can incentivize CEOs. I'm going to make a couple of suggestions. And the first one depends upon an observation that before every major accident, there are always warning signs that things are amiss. Warning signs which are missed, are not picked up, but had they been picked up and acted on, they would have prevented that accident from happening. So this is a very important starting point. So where this goes, if you take that observation seriously, it means you've got to have in place a reporting system which is going to pick up those warning signs and get that information to the top of the organization, and in particular to the CEO, so that he or she will act on it. So what I propose here is that it's from the point of view of boards. Boards have to be concerned to set in place incentives which are going to impact on the CEO. And the way for them to do that is to say to the CEO, okay, we're interested in reports of what might be going wrong in your organization. Tell us about this. In particular, what incentives have you provided to your workforce to make reports about major accident risk, to make reports about warning signs, which, if attended to, might prevent a major accident from happening? The focus has got to be on the big risks, the big accidents. So what incentives have you put in place to ensure that people are reporting? And are any of these reports actually reaching you? This is from the point of view of the board saying to the CEO, are any of these reports actually reaching you? What are some of the most significant reports that have reached you? And what have you done about these most significant reports which have reached you? So this is a long way from a quantitative exercise. This is a qualitative exercise which gets the board into a conversation with the CEO about what he or she are doing about major accident risks. And at the end of that process, then there's a qualitative evaluation which then could be fed into bonus arrangements. So that's one idea I'd like to float on your program. I don't know, I don't imagine you'll have many board members listening to you or reading your material, but if we can get these ideas in front of board members, that's what I really think is important. And the second idea, again from the point of view of boards who are wanting to incentivize their CEOs, is to say to their CEOs, all right, what we want you to do is to do walkarounds at all of your sites. And there must be well thought through walkarounds, and they must be focused on major accident risk. And so what you need to do before you go on your walkaround of these sites, as most CEOs do these days, is prepare yourself. And the way you prepare yourself is to get some briefing from experts from that site or know about that site. What are the most serious events which could occur at that site? And then what are the controls that are supposed to be in place to prevent those things from happening? And when you do your walk around, then you ask those questions and you ask about what are the controls that are supposed to be in place here, and how well do you think they're functioning, and how better might they be made to function? And this is the way you conduct your walk around. And then when you next meet us, the board, we will ask you questions about what did you learn from your walk around, and what changes have you made from that walk around as a result of what you learned. And again, this is a qualitative exercise, and the board would need to make some qualitative evaluation about how seriously CEOs are taking these kinds of issues and feed that back into their bonus arrangements. So I think we've got to abandon the idea of quantitative measures in this context and try and devise these more innovative and obviously more subjective kinds of ways of feeding information in at that level.
I can't help but feel excited by what you just said there. Abandon the idea of quantitative measures. I can imagine OSH practitioners and CEOs and business leaders recoiling at that point because of that old adage, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So this sounds like a giant leap away from where safety has traditionally focused on the accident frequency rates. So how do OSH practitioners convince their CEOs and their boards and their senior leaders to abandon quantitative measures and give them the confidence that qualitative measures, getting out, walking around, asking more meaningful questions, how do they manage to get that transition? Because it sounds like a huge leap potentially.
It is a huge leap, and I think the key to it is to make a distinction between major accidents and more conventional occupational health and safety accidents. Now, those more conventional accidents happen sufficiently frequency in a large organization, with sufficient frequency in a large organization for you to be able to develop some quantitative measures. Now, there are problems with those, which I won't go into now, but at least you can develop some, injury rates. What are your injury rates and are they going up or down? And that is an arguably sensible thing to do. When you're talking about major accidents, these things are very rare and you cannot compute a major accident rate in a large organization. You have to abandon the idea that you can talk about a rate of major accidents and seek to drive that rate down. You can't do that because in the course of any one CEO's reign, if you like, as CEO of a company, it's unlikely that there will be a major accident which is so severe that it will impact on the profitability of that company. It's unlikely, and so any kind of measure which is tied to the frequency of those accidents is not going to be significant, is not going to have the slightest chance of overriding the annual pressures to maximize return on incentive. So that's the argument that has to be made. And so the boards have got to say, well, we have to take shareholders' interests into account, and shareholders may have a longer term investment in this company than you, the CEO, does. They may be there for 10, 20, 30 years, particularly the pension companies, the superannuation companies. They want to be able to invest in these highly hazardous but profitable organizations in the long term. And they need to be convinced that somehow or other the organization, the board of directors of the corporation, has some way of taking account of that longer term in a way that the CEOs themselves don't do. And so that's why it's in the interest of the board to try and find these qualitative ways of ensuring that CEOs take a greater interest in these matters.
How do we get to a position where the board realizes it needs to encourage CEOs to be more qualitative, to get out there? Because as you pointed out at the beginning, CEOs are probably getting out into their business from time to time. But my experience over the last 26 years is that when top leaders go out into the business, everybody knows about it in advance. So they polish everything up in advance. And what the CEO or any top leader in the organization for that matter receives is a version of the organization, the factory, the lab, the work environment that's not normal, where everybody's on their very best behavior, everything's in place. And so it doesn't look like the normal work environment that workers are in and where they're exposed to risks. So how do you get away from prepping for the leader's visit so that the leader really sees the reality?
Well, yeah, that's a very good point. So many of these walkarounds are little more than sightseeing tours. Or waving the flag tours, and the CEOs go out without any kind of preparation, and they're not active investigators. They are just sitting often in management rooms on site, being briefed by management about how well the company is doing in terms of its the local business is doing in terms of its return on investment or its remarkably low accident rate. And they just sit there and soak this up, and they do not approach what they're hearing with skepticism. And I think skepticism is really the key quality which senior people must cultivate. They must assume that they're being told, they're being provided with the good news, and that the bad news is being censored. They must assume that. They must have this sense of chronic unease about what's going on in their organization. And unless they have a way of digging for it, they will never find what's really going on. They will never get the bad news. And that's why it's so important to focus on particular kinds of questions like, you know, what's the worst thing that could go wrong here? Now, of course, the local business is not going to want to answer that question. It's not a nice question for them at all. But if the CEO insists on pursuing that question, what is the worst thing that could happen? Of course, it's very rare. We know you have the risks under control. It's very rare. But what if it did happen? What could go wrong? And then what are your controls that are supposed to be in place? And how do you really know they are in place? If the CEO approaches matters in that way with that kind of skepticism, it turns things around quite dramatically. And this will only happen if the board makes it happen. So how do you get the board to think in these terms? I think the law is very important here, and the law is increasingly saying that boards of directors have obligations, and that they have duties, and that they will be held accountable. Excuse me. Unfortunately, the law is really only holding directors accountable in very small companies. But increasingly this will happen. We'll see ways in which directors are being held accountable. They're being held accountable increasingly in relation to climate change. And I think we'll see increasing attempts to hold them accountable in relation to major accident risk.
We've talked about CEOs and boards here, and indeed your contribution to the 1% Safer book suggests that, and these are your words, the CEOs of many large companies are paid huge bonuses based purely on the share market performance of their company. We need to ensure that safety, particularly with respect to major accident risk, is incentivized in a similarly powerful way. I know that you're very focused on getting the structure right from the top so that it percolates down through the organization. But if we pause for a moment and just drill down through the hierarchy together, if we think about the sorts of experiences that the typical occupational safety and health practitioner will have, then they'll be going into a senior leadership team meeting for a site or for an organization, meeting the president and leadership team of that organization and talking about safety. What can we do there at that level, this kind of next tier down from CEO and board, to really start to drive a meaningful change? Because my brain is starting to follow your lead and making me think about accident frequency rates, lost time injury rates, and quite often, and you've said this in some of your writing in the past, organizations and managers manage the measures. And I think what you're doing is suggesting that accident frequency rates could be manipulated in some way. You know, that I have an accident and my boss says to me, come into the office and do some paperwork, and then you know, you can read some risk assessments and still you're technically working. It's not a reportable accident that will damage our accident rate. How do we get past that? Is that about abandoning lost time injury rates as well as a metric and doing something different at that level?
Well, if an organization is large enough to be having a significant number of injuries, lost time injuries, then you certainly want to focus on the injury rate and drive it down. And the thing about if it's a significant number, and you suppose you've had 50 or 100 in 1 year, then getting it down to half of that in the next year would be a phenomenally wonderful outcome. But if you're only having 1 or 2 a year, lost time injuries, and many big companies have very few lost time injuries, then driving that number down lower is impossible and pointless and statistically irrelevant. And that's why companies have moved away from LTIs to medical treatments or total recordable injuries, and they focus on those. But unfortunately, there are 2 ways of driving those numbers down. One is by reducing the risk, which is what you hope that they're doing, but the other is by managing the measure itself. and by finding ways to obscure what's happened. I mean, it goes on, even with first aid, people talk about, all right, let's get right down, we get away from LTIs, we get away from medical treatments, or even people being given alternative duties. Let's get down to the I suppose, the simplest and the most minor of injuries, a first aid treatment. So, but the manipulation goes on here as well, because it's been on the definition of a first aid treatment. A first aid treatment is often something which a nurse will administer to a worker. And if the worker comes into the first aid post and the nurse says to the worker, if you put this band-aid on yourself, it doesn't count as a first aid. If I do, it counts as a first aid. What would you like to do? And that's the kind of pressure then, which means that even first aids as a measure are being manipulated. So, I mean, when we're having a lot of accidents, we do need to drive that number down. But when that number is close to zero, we need to focus on other things. And we need to focus, I think, on major accident risk, because these are the things that can go wrong. Fatality risk, these are the things which fatalities are rare in many organizations, but they do happen. Let's focus on what are the precursor events. One of my arguments is that let's get away from the accident itself. Let's focus on the precursor events. What are the things, the warning signs, and can we count those warning signs? Are they more meaningful things to count? And you mentioned one of my books recently where it was a coal mine accident, and they were getting high readings of methane very frequently getting these high readings of methane, which means that the risk of explosion is very high. But they weren't reacting, they didn't treat that as a measure of risk. And they didn't treat that as something which was an indication that they were in dangerous territory. So they went ahead and accepted large numbers of these high readings of methane, and eventually they had a major explosion. And so I think that would be, in that context, the number of these exceedance, as they're called, where you exceed the legislated limit that you're supposed to stay below. The number of these exceedances is itself a measure, even though you haven't had an accident, you haven't had an explosion or an ignition even, but you've got an unacceptably high level of methane. That's an important indicator. It's a precursor. So if we can count those precursors and drive them down, this is a way of reducing that risk. And there are many other examples of that I could give you. I'm doing a lot of talking, but the airline industry is a very good example of this. In particular, air safety organizations, air navigation organizations. What's the worst thing that an air traffic control organization can experience? It's a mid-air collision. They're very rare. But if you wait and count the number of times you have a mid-air collision, you'll never be able to improve safety in those air traffic control organizations. So they don't count number of mid-air collisions. What they count is when aircraft are closer together than they should be. They've got a very clear definition of where these aircraft are supposed to be in the airspace. And sometimes these aircraft violate those constraints. They're closer than they should be. They're not dangerously close, but they're closer than they're supposed to be. It's called a breakdown of separation. And air traffic control organizations count those breakdowns of separation. And they know how many they've had, and they're constantly trying to minimize that number, because they know very well that this is a precursor. It won't automatically result in a collision, a mid-air collision, but every mid-air collision is preceded by a breakdown of separation. So it's worth counting those things and driving that number down. And I think that's a general principle that can operate whenever your injury rates are getting so low that they're not any longer meaningful indicators of risk.
You've given two very clear examples here from mining and from aviation about the importance of focusing on the warning signs, or the precursors, as you're calling them. I'm immediately kind of thinking about, it sounds like you're saying don't focus too much on lost time injury rates. Focus instead on near misses.
Yes.
In common speak. One of the things that often happens to organizations, I think, is that they focus heavily on near misses, and they start off with the best of intentions, but they suddenly start gathering hundreds and thousands of near misses, many of which are really very minor in real terms. And then eventually, after this flurry of activity, people kind of get bored, or they get tired because there's too much admin involved in reporting, recording, and feeding back on these things, that the whole process kind of seems to drift, and we go back to not reporting near misses again until the next big thing. So how would an organization go about setting up a process to look for these warning signs, to look for these precursors, without falling into that trap of generating loads of near misses that don't add a lot of value?
All right, that's an important question. So let me have a go at this. In some contexts, you can define what the most relevant near miss is, what the most relevant precursor event is. And in the context of air traffic control, it's breakdown of separation. And so it's very clear that's what you count. The other thing about these things is that they don't depend upon any people to report them, because they're visible in the electronic data. And so they can't easily be fudged. And the same with the high methane readings that I mentioned earlier. This is the most important precursor event to an explosion in a coal mine, and because they are electronically recorded, they're not dependent upon individuals reporting them, and they're not easily fudged. That doesn't mean to say they can't be fudged, but they're not as easily fudged as some other kinds of indicators are. So that's the first point. If you've got some sensible precursor indicators, then let's use those. But if we more generally, and this is also extremely important, more generally want people to be reporting near misses or warning signs, and we can't specify beforehand what those things are, we are dependent upon our workforce to be alert to these things and to report them. How are we going to make that happen? If we decide we're going to focus on quantitative measures, how many reports do we get? That's the kiss of death. That's fatal, as to the reasons that you said. You'll get large numbers of trivial reports, and your system will be overloaded, and it will break down under its own weight. So we've got to get away from quantitative numbers of reports. We've got to get to quality. The quality of the reports that are being made. So what we have to do is try and incentivize people to make quality reports. And so the way I imagine this could happen, and I've written about this, I can send you a paper about it if you're interested, is that you have to have little competitions at site level, and these have to escalate up to ultimately to corporate level. And at the site level, at the end of every month or every quarter, the site manager has to make a decision about which is the most useful report that he or she has received in that period. And what does useful mean? It's going to mean helpful in terms of preventing a major accident or preventing a fatality or something like this. It's not going to be something which prevents you from cutting your finger. So the judgment has to be made. What is the most helpful report in the reporting period? And you may have a panel. The site manager may say, all right, well, we're going to have an expert panel here to think about this, and the most useful report of the period is announced by the site manager or the business manager if you're going one step further up. And there is a significant reward, both a psychological reward, and I believe there should be material reward. I've seen many examples where reports are given substantial financial rewards, $1,000, that sort of reward, if it's a particularly useful report in terms of helping to prevent a major accident. And the reasoning behind that judgment is announced every quarter. This was the most useful report because it helped us avoid this kind of accident. And very quickly, over time, this will build up and people will get a sense of what sort of things are being rewarded and what are not. I mean, maybe there are potholes in the road outside the building, which they want to report. Yes, they report them, but no one's ever going to get an award for reporting potholes. So quickly, over a period of a few reporting periods, people will get to understand what is it that's going to get the attention of management. And if you have this thing escalating up through the organization, you know, the best reports in any period enter a competition at a higher level of the organization, and so on up the line to where the CEO is making a judgment at the end of the reporting period about what was the most useful, helpful report that we had across the whole organization in this last reporting period. This is the way in which you were going to get people focused on major accident risk or fatality risk. Now, there are not many organizations that do this, but some do, and I've seen it work very well.
Fantastic. I love that we draw towards the close of our discussion with a really clear suggestion about where we focus. You started with this idea of abandoning the idea of quantitative measures. We've got to get towards quality, the quality of the reports that are coming in, and we've got to get the CEO and top leaders out there a bit more. This idea of leaders going to Gemba, let's just end with this. If you can kind of give us a couple of practical ideas about when a leader, whether they're the CEO or the site manager, goes out to Gemba, goes out to do a walk around the shop floor, around the workplace, what are the top 2 or 3 things that he or she must be looking for or must be asking the workforce? Can you give us just a couple of quick ideas to finish us off?
Yes. So they must go out as an investigator and inquirer. That's the first point, not as someone who is trying to convey the message of how important safety is, because all your workforce have heard that message many times before. They don't want to hear it again. But if your CEO, your manager, goes out with an attitude of humility to learn from the worker about what's going on and asks questions like, what is the worst thing, what are you most afraid of that might happen at this site? That provokes often a very helpful kind of discussion. Another question is, if there was one thing we could do to improve safety at this site, what would it be? So it's about engaging the workforce. It's about learning from the workforce, because they know very well, if you engage them in a humble way, they'll provide you with all kinds of interesting things. One quick example I was involved with a big company, a pipeline company recently, and the pipelines, they were distributing oil and gas through pipelines right across North America. And it's all controlled from one center in one city in North America. And they control the switching in all the complex network of pipelines throughout North America. And at this local site that we were at, I was with the CEO, and the CEO said to these people at the site, if there was one thing we could do, what would it be? And quick as a flash came back the answer. We're not entirely happy with the fact that what goes on at this site that we're in some sense responsible for is controlled by people thousands of kilometers away. We would prefer to have more hands-on control of what is going on here. We think that would be safer. And the CEO was really struck by this. Now, he's not going to change the distribution mechanism overnight, but he's going to go away and think about, well, what were these people trying to tell me? How could we encourage them to have a greater say, or enable them to have a greater say in what is going on in this distribution process?
I love that your final suggestion brings us a full circle all the way back. You're suggesting that the leader needs to say, what one thing is it that we can do, which is essentially the whole point of 1% Safer. It's a compilation of ideas that if you just did one of those things, you could make the world of work a little bit safer.
Mm-hmm.
Andrew Hopkins, it's always a delight to talk to you. I'm very grateful for you making time to talk to us and share your experience and your perspective with us. Thank you. for your ongoing support of 1% Safer and the 1% Safer Foundation. Look forward to seeing you again soon.
Okay, it's been my pleasure, Andrew. Thank you.
Here we go. Okay, cool. So there you have it, Professor Dr. Andrew Hopkins. What an exciting chat. You can see I was clearly in my element there. I was loving his thinking about just what we're missing when it comes to safety leadership and safety culture. I can see that some people have started posting some comments into the chat box. Or rather the Q&A box. So please, if you do have any questions in particular, Andrew's not here live, as you know. I explained to you, he's in Australia, so we recorded that session a few days ago, especially for you today. So he can't answer the questions, but we can answer the questions, right? We can talk about them here. We've got a few minutes left before we finish at 3 o'clock Central European time. So let's have a look at comments here. And VK says, what about serious injuries and fatalities, SIF as a measure, both due to major hazards or occupational hazards as well? Absolute numbers if the company is small in size, other measures like process safety events, loss of primary containment will continue to be measured. Well, I think if Andrew was here, I've known him for a number of years, I think if he was here, he'd tell us that looking at process safety is super important. I mean, he's known as a process safety expert. But you heard that view from him very clearly. He said, we need to abandon quantitative measures and focus on being more subjective. And then he was even more direct later when he said, lost time injury rates, pointless, completely pointless. So I think he's accepting of the idea that organizations have got into the habit of measuring accident numbers. But I know he's also aligned with me. We're both concerned about this focus on failure. If you think about it, an accident is a failure, right? So it's not very often in businesses where the focus is on counting the number of failures and trying to fail less. But in safety, we seem to do that. And what Andrew is advocating here is that we take a much more proactive approach. You heard him say we need to engage in a more humble way. Now, if this is subjective, then that would suggest to me that this is much more about how people are feeling, what their mindsets are like. And I like his suggestion on how to engage in a more humble way. He talked of the CEO that said, if there's one thing we could do to improve safety, what would it be? And I think that's a great question to ask people when asked sincerely and humbly. VK is also saying the problem with reporting near misses in an operational facility is that workers know fellow colleagues closely and find it better to raise these issues as part of regular team or safety meetings rather than formal near-miss report. One size doesn't fit all. I agree with you there. Companies and facilities must decide what proactive measures best suit their culture. Yeah, indeed, I fully agree with that. Almost every day, leaders around the world that we're working with in our consulting practice ask me, so what's the best metric? What should I be measuring? And I say, well, it depends on what you want to see more of. So I think whenever we're thinking about metrics, we should try to look for metrics that focus on behaviors, particularly the sorts of behaviors that we want to see more of, not the ones we want to see less of, and then set metrics around that. And perhaps a question to reflect on metrics is, do you measure what you value, or do you really value what you measure? Bart is suggesting, hello Bart, good to see you here. Very glad that you talk about the problem of underreporting of work accidents. Yeah, Andrew's talked a lot about that, especially in his new book called Sacrificing Safety. It's a really good book, I highly recommend it. This is a global and heavily underestimated problem. Yeah, I agree with that too, Bart. Too much focus on the numbers can and will push people to hide them. How can we change this? Well, I think you're right. The suggestion is good. Talking about it is the first step, and thanks for your encouragement there, Bart. Showing facts and figures, yeah, perhaps. But what's the next step? Well, I think it's about culture, right? If Andrew was here, I think he'd probably push us towards thinking about how we create an open and transparent culture where people feel like they have the psychological safety to speak up and to tell their leaders when they have a problem, when they've made a mistake, when they've had an accident or had a serious near miss. And Bart, thanks for posting your LinkedIn post, The Dark Secret. I read that post last week and really enjoyed it. So if others on this call would like to think more about that, do click on the link that Bart's giving us there. Suzanne Hansen, hello Suzanne, good to see you. Do you have any suggestions how to get the middle management involved? Well, I think Andrew's point here is not exclusive to the top level. So he's talking about engaging in a humble way. I think that's it. Indeed, in my practice, I talk about managers and leaders not necessarily needing to be competent, but also needing to be confident and comfortable in engaging around safety. And I think that begins by redefining what safety actually is, because in my experience over the last 26 years, quite often when I say to people I work in health and safety, they go, oh, you must have had that as well, right? Health and safety has a bit of a stigma, a bit of a reputation, and it's not a good one always. We know we're all doing great work and it's really important, but somehow it doesn't feel very sexy or very cool for some people. So I think this is about creating confidence and comfort, showing team leaders, mid-managers and senior executives how to have meaningful conversations. It's not about saying, do you have any safety issues or have you got any safety suggestions? Instead, it's about the question that Andrew mentioned. If there's one thing we could do to improve safety around here today, what would that be? And maybe just getting mid-managers to ask that question would be a great start. Sarah Hopkins, you've written perfect, thank you. I'm not quite sure what's perfect or what you're thanking us for, but hopefully you're enjoying the session that Andrew just gave and some of these comments. Mark Devlin asks, can safety and productivity be equal goals? I think they can. In fact, I was talking to a group of leaders. I spent the week in Salt Lake City in Utah in the United States last week. And the same question came up there, Mark. And I said, you know, I think we get too mixed up by prioritizing safety. This whole mantra around safety first drives me crazy. And I suggested to them actually that the role of an organization is to make great quality products and services safely. So I think safety is an enabler of productivity. And that would be my view on that. It needs to be incorporated as how we do what we do. Someone in the States last week said it's a license to operate. And I think that's a good thought too. Barry James, how do you convince a CEO to change bonus arrangements to include health and safety features? This is a difficult area to validate and demonstrate benefits. If you go to Andrew Hopkins' book, which is called Risky Rewards, Andrew Hopkins and Sarah Maslin, I think Sarah's name is, but Andrew Hopkins' Risky Rewards book, he talks all about this issue with bonus arrangements and how to include safety in a good way. So I'd point you there, Barry. Have a look at that. Risky Rewards is the name of that book. Thanks for these questions and comments in here. That's really great. It's lovely to have a bit of interaction with you. We're almost out of time. We've got 1 minute left on the clock. So let me just return to where I started. I began this session by telling you a little bit about the 1% Safer book. It's about 1 kilo in weight, 137 chapters by some of the world's leading thinkers, not just in safety, but in management, in leadership, in policy, in academia, and many more. I'd love you to buy a copy of it. You can get it at 1%safer.com. Every cent from the proceeds of the sale of the book and also from the tickets sold for this event this week go to the 1% Safer Foundation, a charitable fund set up to help OSH practitioners who need a little bit of support or development, and to create bursaries and scholarships for those in developing nations around the world. And we're really excited about that. Melissa's just posted a link in the chat box where you can click, get straight to the website and buy a book. You can also join the movement on the website. Click on and join the movement. Tell us how you're making the world of work safer. Make a pledge. Tell us what you're doing. And also, you can access the 1% Safer Foundation Fund. Make an application for a grant or an award there. So you can do all of those things at 1%safer.com. Please do have a look. And as I said at the beginning, have a think about who in your network might benefit from a bit of support from 1% Safer Foundation. So that draws us to the end of this session. thank you all for being here. Thank you especially to our gold sponsors, Quentic and Cority, and to Eco Online, and also to Saferpedia, media partner for this event. We're running sessions every day this week. Have a look at 1%safer.com. There's some amazing sessions. There's a couple of recordings and there's a lot of live events coming as well. So do please check in. Your ticket allows you access to everything that we're doing every day this week. And there's even a community panel where people that have already joined the 1% Safer movement will share their ideas on how to make the world of work safer. So do please come in and get involved. I'm seeing lots of thumbs up and claps coming now on the Q&A. Thank you very much for being here with us. I wish you a great day. Stay safe, take care of yourselves and each other. Bye for now.